Hello, grade 8-9. Uh, we're going to start off today's lesson by going over the worksheet from last class, which dealt with the concepts that we encountered in the first part of our biological diversity unit. All right, so part A of our worksheet dealt with matching. Okay, you had four terms and four definitions to match them to. All right, the first term it was variation. All right, so that would be uh, definition C, which is differences between species or among individuals of the same species. Okay, so the answer to that one is C. All right, next up is biodiversity. All right, biodiversity is definition D, the variety and complexity of living organisms, their genetic differences, the ecosystems they form, and the interactions among them. Okay, so that would be D. Okay, our next term was species. All right, species would be definition B, which is a group of similar organisms that can breed and produce fertile offspring. Okay, and finally, niche. Well, niche is a place where an organism lives and the role it plays in that environment. So that would be definition A for that one. Right, so it's CDBA. Right, if you got those answers in that order, good job. You're a science star. All right, so that brings us to part B, the short answer. The first question you had to answer was, why is variation within and among species important for species survival? Okay, the reason why is because variation increases the chances that a type of organism will survive changes to its environment. All right, so one of the examples of this that we talked about in class was the banded snail. Right, that was a type of snail that whose shells came in many different colors, and we learned that because these shells came in so many different colors, that made it so that every season some of the snail shells would blend in very well with the surroundings, and they'd be harder to find. It made it harder for predators to find them and eat them. All right, so the fact that more of the snails were able to survive because of the different colors of shells helped to ensure their survival. So basically made it so that not all of them would get eaten by predators, and some would survive, reproduce, and the species would go on. All right, next question was, why is biological diversity vital to humanity? Okay, and the reason why that is, the reason why it's so vital is because we are not sure which other species are necessary for our survival. Okay, and what I mean by that is that every other organism that we rely on, whether it be for food or oxygen or what have you, those organisms in turn rely on other organisms as well to have their needs met. So if humans were very reckless, and for example, maybe humans decide to use this pesticide or something, and it ends up killing an insect that maybe one of our food sources actually relies on as a food source for themselves. Well, that would not be good for humanity. What would happen is, well, that food source of ours, that animal that we were eating, we could no longer access that for food because now that animal is going to be starving because we greatly reduced its food source, if not completely wiped it out. All right, so these are things we have to keep in mind when we're making choices. You know, we have to be very careful about how we affect the environment. We have to be very careful that we don't end up eliminating an animal that we actually need to have alive in order for us to stay alive too. Okay, and just like in that Bill Nye video, we're not really sure which animals are necessary. It's kind of like that Jenga game that they showed, where it's like if you remove certain blocks, the whole thing's going to fall apart. So you got to be very careful. All right, so this brings us to the second page of the worksheet where we were asked to define symbiosis. So symbiosis in simplest terms is basically just a relationship between two organisms in which at least one organism relies on the other. Or relies on the other for something. Okay, a little vague, but when I say it relies on another organism for something, that could be a food source. Maybe it protects. Maybe it has some form of protection from the other organism, or it could also maybe gain the ability to move from the other organism, which is the case when you have, for example, a barnacle on a whale. All right, so the next thing we were tasked with doing was to list the three types of symbiosis and provide a brief description of each as well as an example. All right, so let's start with commensalism. All right, so in commensalism, one organism benefits the other neither benefits nor is harmed. Okay, unfortunately it looks like it's going to unfortunately it looks like this document's formatting is a little messed up in this section here, so please bear with me while I try to tidy this up a little tiny bit here. All right, so an example of commensalism okay, that was weird. I don't know what happened there. Just a sec. Maybe I can fix it. There we go. Google, why do you hate me, Google? That's okay. Let's just get back into it here. All right, so an example of commensalism would be birds nesting in trees and barnacles on whales. In each case, well, in the first example there, the tree is not being harmed by having a nest in it. It doesn't make a difference to the tree. And in the case of the barnacle on the whale, well, the barnacle doesn't actually have any harmful effect on the whale. It just attaches itself to it. It's not stealing food from the whale. It's not causing it any sort of discomfort or pain. It's just attached to it. And the barnacle benefits from this because now it can use the whale's motion to get food from the water. Because as the whale swims through the water, the barnacle can filter the water, and it's likelier to actually encounter stuff that it can eat in the water. Okay, so next type of symbiosis we're going to talk about is mutualism. Okay, so mutualism, both organisms benefit. Okay, and neither one is harmed from the arrangement. Okay, so examples of this would be lichens. Okay, so lichen is a combination of fungus and algae. And the way it works is the fungus gets food from the algae, it gets nutrients from it because it can't make its own food, right? But the algae is a plant, so it can do that. And the algae benefits because the fungus surrounds it and protects it from dehydration and also from being eaten by animals too. All right, and the last kind of symbiosis is called parasitism. Okay, and this is where one organism benefits and the other one is harmed. Okay, so examples of this would be things like tapeworms and dogs, although that's not the only animal that they victimize. So tapeworms and dogs, lice, and humans. Again, lice. Humans are not the only species that uh, lice affect, but just for the sake of an example, let me see if I can think of one more. So tapeworms and dogs, lice in humans. Oh yeah, and also another one, scabies mites in humans. Ugh. Science can be gross sometimes. Thanks for bearing with me. So in each of these cases, the tapeworm benefits because it gets food from the dog. The dog's not benefiting; it's losing nutrients to the tapeworm. In the second instance, the lice get a home in the human, and they also suck the blood of the human. The human is not benefiting, and the human is also suffering because of that, because their skin is getting irritated and they're losing blood. And in the third case, similar to the example with lice, scabies mites are these disgusting little creatures that actually burrow into human skin, and yeah, they steal nutrients from, I believe it's the bloodstream, or they might just actually eat skin cells. I can't remember off the top of my head, but either way, they are taking stuff away from their human host, and the human is suffering in the process with very irritated, itchy skin. All right, so the last part of our worksheet was the true or false. The first one says biodiversity only means the number of different species in an area. Okay, this is false. Biodiversity actually refers to much more than that. First of all, it refers to all of the different life forms on planet Earth and their complexity, their differences in genetics, their differences in where you find them. It's much more, the term biodiversity encompasses, it deals with much more than just the number of different species in a certain area. So that is false. Okay, the next one. Oh yeah, I guess I forgot that it does say to correct the statement if it's false. Although I'm betting that probably none of you actually did that. But whatever. If we're going to correct this statement, biodiversity, we'd actually strike through all of this. Well, actually, I'll just take all this out. Biodiversity deals with the complexity of different life forms on the entire planet. Okay, so that's what it actually is. I'm just trying to remember how to do the strike through on here. I guess I could do it like this. Here's the format. Oh, here we go. It's up here. Okay, so we cross that out and replace it with this. Biodiversity deals with the complexity of different life forms on the entire planet. Okay, and question 2. A species with variations is less likely to survive predators and changes in its environment. That is also false. That is also a load of baloney, which is haram. That's false. Okay, and the correction we make here is we just simply change less to more likely. Okay, and replace that with the word more. All right, next question. Interspecies competition involves members of the same species competing for the same resources in an area. Okay, again, false. Right, remember, inter means between, right? So if we're talking about interspecies competition, that means it's between species, different species, okay? Okay, so the answer to this is actually going to be different species competing for the same resources. Okay, so we just changed same to different. All right, the next question. A community contains only one species in a certain area, and a population contains all species in a certain area. Again, this is a load of baloney. It's false. Now, in this case, the statement is reversed. Okay, so we would cross out only one. And on your sheet, actually, you can write this above where it says only one. I'm gonna type it beside because I don't have a choice here. But a community contains all species in a certain area, and a population contains, cross out all, and we're going to replace that with only one. All right, so remember that a population is only one kind of species, okay, within that group. The community is all of the species in that area. Okay, and then finally, we have an ecosystem is made of, that should have been of, sorry about that. An ecosystem is made of only biotic factors. False once again. All right, so to make it true, we'll take out the word only, and we'll add these two words. Abiotic and, because it has both abiotic and biotic factors. And my computer is fighting me for some reason. Please stand by while I try to fix this. Thank you. Okay, so cross out only, and then above it write abiotic and. Okay, because an ecosystem is made up of both abiotic and biotic factors. An ecosystem itself is actually all the interactions between the biotic and abiotic components. All right, so that brings us to the end of the worksheet from the other day. Now I'm just going to move on to a new activity here that I'd like to go through. So for part 1 of this activity, I'm going to ask you, which has more organisms? A phylum or an order? All right, and if you're confused as to how to go about this, remember, kings play some chess on fine-grained sand. All right, remember this phrase reminds us of the different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. which are kingdom, phylum, subphylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. All right, and as we go from one level to the next, starting from kingdom, you have fewer and fewer organisms in each category. All right, so now what we have to do is we have to just kind of check really quickly which comes first in this order. Is it kingdom? Is it phylum? Or sorry, which comes first in the sequence rather? Okay, does the phylum appear first or does order? All right, in this case, phylum does. So that means that the phylum would have more organisms. Okay. Whoops, phylum. There we go. All right, let's try another round here. I'll leave the cheat notes up here for you to make it a little easier for us. Okay, which would have more organisms? Would a subphylum or a family have more organisms? All right, in this case, it's going to be family, right? Because the family appears after subphylum in the levels of Bloom's taxonomy. All right, let's do one more here. Which has more organisms? A genus or a class? All right, so in this case, the class is the one that has more organisms. And by the way, I really do apologize, class. I just realized I misspoke on those last two examples. As you go down Bloom's taxonomy, there's fewer and fewer organisms in each of the categories. Now, in the last one, I totally misspoke. I apologize. That one was a subphylum or family. And a subphylum or a family, it's actually the subphylum that has more organisms. So I apologize for getting that wrong. And in hindsight, I think I actually did the first one correctly, because it was a phylum and order, right? And we said phylum had more. But just in case I screwed that one up, I'll just put it up here again. Phylum or order. In that case, the phylum has more organisms. All right, so whichever level of the taxonomy appears first in this order, which you can recite by using the phrase "kings play some chess on fine-grained sand," whichever level you encounter first, starting from kingdom and going down to species, that level is going to have more organisms than the other one. Okay, so just keep that in mind. All right, now for this next part of our lesson, I'm going to give you some examples of symbiosis. Your job is to tell me what kind of symbiosis it is, okay? Just give me a second here. I'm just going to have a couple sips of my coffee and try to cook up some examples for us. All right, so here's a really good one. All right, so bacteria that live inside the human intestine aid in digestion. Would this be commensalism, mutualism, or parasitism? Okay, this would be mutualism because the bacteria are getting food and shelter from the human, but at the same time, they're actually providing a service and helping us with our digestion. All right, so here's another example. Foot fungus irritates the skin on the toes of a human. Is this commensalism, mutualism, or parasitism? All right, this would be parasitism because only the foot fungus is benefiting here. The human is suffering because of the foot fungus. They're not gaining anything from it. and they are being harmed in the process because of their skin actually being irritated. All right, let's do one more example here. Sorry, give me a second here. It's kind of tricky to think of another example for the third type of symbiosis that we haven't discussed in class yet. All right, I'm sorry. I can't think of an example right now, so we'll just move on for now, and I'll come back to that one if it comes to me. All right, for the next part of our lesson here, let's go over the difference between a population and a community once again. I'm going to describe a group of organisms. Your job is to tell me if it's a population or a community. All right, so first example here is a bunch of bacteria cells in a petri dish in a lab. Would that be a population or a community? Okay, this would be population because we only have bacteria, right? Only one type of organism means it's a population. All right, so let's try another example here. Every organism that resides, I'll just start a new page here. That resides in a pond. Would that be a population or a community? Okay, in this case, it's a community because a community consists of all of the living creatures in a certain area. All right, in this case, it's a pond, right? So make sure that you know the difference between those two. Population's only one organism in a certain area, or it's the group that it would be the group of all of. Sorry, let me try saying that again. Sometimes my brain doesn't know which words it wants to spit out, so let me try that again here. Just remember, yeah, population is a group of just one species from an area, okay? And the community is what you would get if you took every single organism out of a certain area. All right, so like all of the cows from a farmer's field, that's a population, for example. Every animal on that farm, the farmers and the human and the all the crops that were grown on that farm and all the plants that are on that farm, that would be the community. Okay, that's the difference between the two. Okay, so let's briefly discuss the difference between an ecosystem and a community. All right, so community, as we just learned or relearned or cemented in our memory, is the group containing all of the organisms from a certain area. Okay, that's what a community is. All right, now that sounds awfully close to an ecosystem, doesn't it? All right, however, there is a very, very important difference. Does an ecosystem contain just living things? No, that's right. It also has abiotic factors. Okay, so that's the main difference between the two. An ecosystem also contains abiotic factors, whereas a community does not. Everything in a community is alive. Okay. All right, so this actually, I actually should have done biotic or abiotic first, but let's just kind of quickly go over what each of these means. Biotic means that it's alive, okay? It's a living creature. Abiotic, an abiotic means it's non-living. Okay, so let's go over a few components of an ecosystem and see if we can determine if they're biotic or abiotic. All right, so the first thing, dirt. Biotic or abiotic? Okay, that would be abiotic, right? Dirt is not alive. There's stuff that lives like in the dirt, but the dirt itself is not alive. All right, so the next one, water. Again, abiotic, right? And just like the dirt, yeah, stuff lives in the water, but we're talking about like the water itself, the hydrogen dioxide, okay, the H2O. That in and of itself is not alive. All right, next, bacteria. That would be biotic. Bacteria are living creatures. All right, let's see, maybe ants. Biotic, right? They're alive too. Humans, also biotic, okay? What about fungus? That's also biotic. Okay, maybe we'll do one more example here. All right, let's actually two more. Let's see, bears, biotic, right? Okay, and one more example. Sunlight, that's abiotic. All right, but these are all parts of an ecosystem. Okay, so one last thing to talk about again before I sign off here is why do variations prevent a species from becoming extinct? All right, well, apart from that banded snail example that I referred to earlier, we also learned about a special bird. Now, I apologize, off the top of my head, I can't remember which bird it was, but we learned that that particular species of bird was able to survive harsh weather conditions because some of the members of that species had developed a very good ability to store fat, and they also had larger bodies, right? So that variation, where some of these birds they were bigger and they were able to store fat better, they ended up surviving the harsh conditions that were brought on by the cold. Unfortunately, some of their fellow birds did not make it and ended up dying. But because there was that one section of the birds that was better suited to survive the cold, the species of birds lived on. All right, and we saw that with the snails, right? The snails were better able to survive because the different colors served as camouflage in the different seasons. This made it so there was always one group of snails that would survive predation. Predators were not able to find them. And then they would go on to reproduce, and the species lived on. All right, I'm going to double check here really quick and just see if there's any other examples I wanted to talk about before I end the video here. All right, no, I don't. So we'll go ahead and stop the video here for now. All right, thanks for tuning in. Please make sure to smash that like button and subscribe. Bye for now.